Hello! In this work, me and my colleague Ana Sofia will be talking about real estate and renting in UK. In this work, we are going to talk about first the history of real estate and how it passed from ownership to the rental sector, the consequences of the crisis on real estate and renting, what happened after the crisis, and the consequences of COVID on real estate. And lastly, we're going to talk about the differences in living in the countryside and city. After the Second World War, the United Kingdom revolutionized housing policies through investment in social housing and support for home ownership. However, these policies dramatically changed in 1980, namely with Thatcher's right to buy policy, which its objective was to give the working class the opportunity to own their own home and improve their financial circumstances. The 1988 Housing Act introduced shorter tenancy periods, which added consequences such as rent settings and weakening security of the owners of real estate. With this act, the rental sector began to grow, even if slowly, like in the 1990s, when it grew from 9% to 10%. This rental sector became more attractive than owning real estate because of the increase in house prices that was mainly affected due to the increase in mortgage credit, which was a direct result of the credit market liberalization from the 1980s and securitization. Ultimately, this increase in house prices led to the population having more difficulties in owning a house, and instead just being able to rent a house. This is due because the real income per household increased by 27% between 1995 and 2007, and the house prices increased by 168%. All these factors led to the shift from home ownership expansion to its decline due to the affordability gap where low-income families had no other choice than to rent their home instead of being able to buy their own. The global financial crisis caused a huge impact on real estate because the main reasons that people could buy them were because of mortgage lending and securitization, which means that with crisis, fewer people are able to buy a house because they don't have the means to do so, and therefore they turn to private renting. Turning to private renting wasn't the main consequence of the global financial crisis, but was due mainly because the BTL mortgage lending, that was for landlords who want to buy property to rent it out, collapsed and ceased to loan. Other reasons for the crisis in real estate were that house prices fell, property transactions halved, mortgage lending diminished, and lenders increased the size of deposits that they required on new mortgages. But this crisis did have a bigger impact than the early 1990 housing crash. This was mainly due to the actions of the Bank of England, that lowered bank base rate to an all-time low of only 0.5% in March 2009, embarked on a large-scale program of quantitative easing that was a form of unconventional monetary policy in which the central bank purchases lower-term securities from the open market to increase the money supply and encourage lending and investment, to ensure the interest rate remained at a very low level, and launched Funding for Lending scheme, which provided cheap loans to banks for lending primarily to house buyers and then to small business. These actions had also an impact on private rental market, where the low interest rates helped to keep mortgage debts and repossessions among existing BTL landlords at lower levels. Landlords who could obtain a mortgage, the cost of borrowing to prepare their investment in property was relatively cheap, and the low bank rate and quantitative easing reduced the yield on government bonds. Bank deposits and pension annuities, which raised the attractiveness of investment in residential lettings. Not only did this help to recover the real estate and renting, but also the house prices went down, which attracted investors in this field. This financial crisis didn't just provoke short-term impacts, but also more long-term changes, like access to mortgages was harder to get approval, with bigger deposits where their size doubled from 10% to 20% from 2007 to 2013, and where this rule only applied to owner-occupiers and not BTL landlords. However, the rules for tenancies remained the same, and landlords continued to practice short-term leases, which jeopardized the people who need long-term leases. So with this, various groups are campaigning for better conditions for the private tenants, long-term leases, and the reintroduction of rent control. It also affected the British government, and because of this came a new era of fiscal strictness, with the reduction of public spending and the funding of social housing. The augmentation in house prices after the crisis came from overseas investment in real estate, especially in London. There was also a rise in student housing that became quite popular in the rental business, where the government invested in this to stimulate institutional investment, which is a profitable market-sized people that rent are staying for a relatively long term. Even if with crisis there was a possibility to invest in real estate, which some people took advantage of that, many people still didn't have the capacity, which led the private renting sector to expand and be a big source of investment and profits. The pandemic of COVID-19 started as a global health crisis, and because of this it also resulted in an economic crisis. Real estate was one of the sectors that were badly affected by this, and an important decline in the value of the market and all its sectors. In the sector of student accommodation, even if with the pandemic there were online classes, it was still a sector that investors find interesting in investing in because of its profitability. In the rental market, landlords had more difficulty paying their mortgages because due to the pandemic the government issued policies that prevented tenants from being evicted, and many tenants stopped paying rent due to the economic uncertainty. Property buying also declined due to the restrictions on mortgage lending, falling 80% from February 2020 to April of the same year. This benefited the rental industry, and even if in the beginning they took a hit, later it increased by 22% in comparison to 2019, with long-term property rental. This was possible because with the pandemic many people stayed at home and many worked from there, and so there was a bigger demand for renting. In the commercial rental sector during COVID, there was a temporary protection from evictions, but there were more long-term implications wherein in the long term, the commercial rental estate will suffer because business is more and more moving to e-commerce. However, there will be an increase of demand in search of warehouses. Finally, the hospitality real estate industry was the sector that suffered the biggest hit by COVID with having to close or reduce guests. Even if with the pandemic these sectors of real estate suffered greatly economically, some even have to close permanently, with the alleviations of the safety measures there is a certainty that they will recover.
Many Britons who live in a large city dream of escaping and buying a house in a picturesque village. But it is cheaper to live in a rural setting. England in summer is like a large, well-kept garden that stretches on forever. The countryside of England today reflects the health of landowners and the success of those who can afford to escape the trappings of city life. According to a recent survey conducted by Country Life magazine, some 80% of Britain's population dream of living in the countryside, but only 20% live there. We also need to ask another question, that is, what drives Brits to the countryside? Well, there's three reasons. The first one is the quality of life in space. The second one is the sense of community, because we all know that city lives are busy and overcrowding can be stressful. So moving to the countryside can be great for getting to know our neighbors and local businesses like coffee shops and butchers, and the feeling of community can be beneficial when it comes to settling quickly. And the final and third reason is the slower pace of life. We can also say that living like aristocracy is the fourth reason why Brits want to move to the countryside. And that's because those rural areas represent, for some, the last bastions of old England. This means the Golden Age. And that's why loving the countryside is a peculiarly British ambition. The private wealth of Britain's aristocracy remains phenomenal. According to a 2010 report for Country Life, a third of Britain's land still belongs to the aristocracy. In one analysis, the aristocratic descendants of kings were worth 4 billion in 2001, owning 7,000 acres, and 42 of them were members of the Lords up to 1999, including the Dukes of Northumberland, Bedford, Beaufort, and Norfolk. These many noble land holdings are among the most prestigious and valuable in the world. One example is the Marquess of Northampton that owns 2,060 acres in Clerkenwell and Canonbury, and the Baroness Howard de Walden that holds most of Harley Street and Marylebone High Street. These holdings attract some of the highest rental values in the world. However, little has changed since 1925, when the journalist W. B. Northrop published a postcard portraying the octopus of landlordism, with its tentacles spread across London, charging the aristocracy with pauperizing the peasantry, paralyzing the building trade, and sucking the lifeblood of the people. Although in theory the beauty of the British countryside should be available for all to enjoy, not everyone can afford to live there, as we mentioned before. Rural houses prices in England are increasing twice as fast as in cities. Prices are rising 14.2% a year in countryside locations on average, compared with less than 7% in urban areas. Figures analyzed by Hampton's estate agency for The Guardian show. The biggest percentage increases of up to 30% were in Broxtown in Nottinghamshire around Lancaster, in Aram in West Sussex, and Amber Valley in Derbyshire. Hampton said that registrations to buy in its rural offices were up by 50% on the same period for 2019, while city buyer registrations rose just 90%. Elizabeth Williamson, an independent councillor in Broxtown, said that people struggle to stay because it isn't affordable and there is not much turnover of housing. Many Britons have moved home in the last 2 years in search of more inside and outdoor space. Countryside and coastal locations have been favored, with house prices in those areas on the rise. Here is a full list of the most desired villages. In Berkshire, we have Sunningdale. In the Buckinghamshire, we have Turnville. In Cambridgeshire, we have the Hemmingford Habits. In the Cheshire, we have the Elderies. And in the Cornwall, we have the Rock. Now we are moving to another perspective, that is the city, because in this presentation we also want to know the difference between the city and the countryside. Over the past few decades, it's become exponentially harder to purchase a home. Salaries have increased far below the rate, which rents have increased, forcing renters to rent for longer before they can buy. And when they do face even higher property prices, which in times of inflation are leveraged to benefit homeowners, wish list putting the chance of home ownership further and further away for the first-time buyer. Analysis shows that with more people renting for longer, UK will face a shortfall in private rented property. UK will need nearly 230,000 new rental homes to avoid a shortfall if the current growth in demand continues, according to a new forecast. Private rented sector supply will have to increase by 227,000 homes a year to meet the demand for 1.8 million new households over the next decade, according to analysis by the consultancy Capital Economics. The UK has faced a persistent shortage of new housing, adding to soaring house price growth, with many people being forced to rent for longer. The number of households in UK private rented sector increased from 2.8 million in 2007 to 4.5 million in 2017, according to official figures. That home ownership has been in decline in the United Kingdom, falling from an all-time high of 70.9% in 2003 to 63.9% in 2018. This decline has coincided with the revival of the private rental market, due to a lack of moderately priced owner-occupied housing. Privately owned and social rental housing is particularly common among young and lower-income households and in urban areas. The country's main political concern is the lack of low and moderately priced housing, usually referred to as affordable housing, which has prompted a flurry of housing policies aimed at improving affordability. The institutional setting in UK is characterized by two key features, which affect both the owner-occupied and rental market. First, in contrast to continental European countries, which implemented rule-based planning systems, the UK regulates its land use via rigid development control system. In this system, each change of use for any land parcel triggers a public consultation process and must be approved on a case-by-case basis by a local planning authority. The system's main aim is to limit the spread of urban development into undeveloped greenfield areas. Second, the UK has a high degree of fiscal centralization, giving very little weight to local taxes. With the consequence, local authorities have virtually no positive fiscal incentives to permit new residential development. In conjunction with the idiosyncratic development control system that assigns strong political power to local "not in my backyard" residents. The ultimate outcome is that housing supply is extremely unresponsive to rising prices, particularly in major urban agglomerations such as London. In these areas, positive demand shocks have the main effect of increasing land and house prices, leading to a severe housing affordability crisis in large parts of the country, and arguably in part explaining the fall in home ownership attainment since the early 2000s. Housing in UK, particularly in London and South East England, is some of the most expensive and cramped in the world. When considering the buying price per square meter of a comparable apartment in a prime central location of the country's main city, London ranks second, topped only by Hong Kong. UK rents are also extraordinarily high. Same comparable apartment in London is also second most expensive to rent, again topped only by Hong Kong. Like that, we finish our presentation about the real estate and housing in UK. I hope you all enjoy and thank you for watching.